Welcome to this explainer. Today we're unpacking the absolute roller coaster journey of a two-sided platform that grew from just 1,000 users to millions, basically by doing the exact opposite of what the entire retail industry told them to do. We're looking at the fascinating evolution of Etsy. Drawing directly from a deep dive MIT market analysis and research on how internet startups scale, we're going to explore a story about art, economics, and the intense friction that happens when handmade culture collides with massive global scale.
So let's dive straight into this core paradox, right? How exactly does a marketplace that was built specifically to fight the industrialization of shopping end up becoming a billion-dollar giant? Two-sided platforms where you have to attract buyers and sellers at the exact same time are notoriously difficult to scale, even on a good day. But trying to do it while actively rejecting the efficiencies of mass production, well, that's a whole different beast. And it requires us to look really closely at the very foundation of how this company was built.
So, let's start with Section 1, the anti-factory marketplace. Way back in 2005, founders Robert Callan and Chris McGuire launched the site because they wanted an online space dedicated entirely to authentic handcrafts. And the economic engine powering this utopian vision? It was actually incredibly straightforward. Unlike other e-commerce giants that just use massive anonymous directories, an Etsy seller creates a highly curated virtual shop, and the revenue model is beautifully simple. Step 1, you set up your shop. Step 2, you pay a tiny 20-cent listing fee that keeps your item up for 4 whole months. And Step 3, Etsy takes a super modest 3.5% cut of the final sale. Boom! That simple engine powered a revolution. And let me tell you, it worked. It is honestly hard to overstate just how successful this authentic model became. By 2013, this little anti-factory platform was moving over $1.35 billion in merchandise. Seriously, they grew to 40 million members with over 26 million unique items listed, pulling in $47 million in pure revenue. It was just undeniable proof that there was this massive, pent-up demand for a totally different kind of commerce.
Which brings us to Section 2. Who actually shops on Etsy?
Because to make this very unique model tick, you need a highly specific kind of consumer. Looking at the data, Etsy's audience heavily over-indexes as female, particularly in higher income brackets. We're talking above $60,000. But here's the absolute best data point. They incredibly over-index on browsing the site from school. It shows that Etsy isn't just a digital store. It's practically a form of entertainment. People use their free time just to surf it, almost exactly the way you'd scroll through a social media feed.
So the big takeaway here is that this specific user base can afford the premium price tag that naturally comes with handmade items. Because these products aren't churned out by a machine, they're inherently more expensive to make. But this higher income demographic, they're way less price sensitive. They aren't desperately hunting for the cheapest possible bargain. They are actively, deliberately paying in markup for genuine authenticity. And that's exactly what allows these artisans to avoid mass production pricing and actually make a living off their art.
But of course, success brings problems. Section 3, the reseller crisis.
This massive, explosive early success led straight into a true existential crisis. Some reporters even called it Etsy's very own industrial revolution. You see, when a handcrafter becomes super successful on the platform, they eventually hit a brutal wall. Their scale is strictly capped by the limits of human labor. There are only so many hours in a day. So to keep these top sellers from abandoning the site as they grew, Etsy softened its rules to allow some outside manufacturing. But that opened up a very dangerous loophole. A massive flood of resellers invaded the site. They started buying 50-cent mass-produced items from overseas factories and flipping them on Etsy for $15, completely disguising them as handmade goods.
From an economics perspective, this created a classic Bertrand competition. Basically, this is a scenario where firms just fiercely race to the bottom on price. Now, buyers on Etsy might be willing to pay for authenticity, sure, but they'll still shift toward a cheaper product if it looks absolutely identical on a screen. This forced the original genuine crafters into an unwinnable price war against cheap fakes. I mean, you literally cannot compete with a factory assembly line when you're sitting in your living room hand-knitting a sweater. There's just no way. And the tension from this loophole escalated incredibly fast. Etsy launched in 2005 and, impressively, hit profitability by 2010. But by May 2012, this reseller issue became so incredibly toxic that a wild event took place. 3,500 stores, which represented a full 1% of the entire marketplace at the time, coordinated to shut their digital doors in a massive one-day protest. The community was in total open revolt. And it worked, ultimately forcing Etsy to roll out much stricter, formalized third-party manufacturing policies by the fall of 2013.
Which leads us to how they actually solved it.
Section 4. Curating through community.
Faced with millions and millions of items, the cost of paying humans to manually inspect every single store to weed out fakes was just, well, financially impossible. So Etsy did something brilliant. They essentially weaponized their own community. They leaned hard into their social platform features, allowing buyers to follow specific stores or tastemakers who had great artistic taste. By turning features like followers into a crowdsourced quality control engine, the top users drove massive demand straight to the authentic stores. And the result? It naturally starved out the cheap resellers who simply couldn't earn the community's organic, authentic endorsement.
Section 5. The economics of scale.
To really tie this all together and understand the underlying math of this two-sided marketplace, we can look at Etsy's own public data drops, a really cool series they called the Weather Forecast. If you map out the relationship between page views and average price, a fascinating mathematical correlation pops right up. Initially, as the platform generated more and more traffic, the average price of goods on the marketplace steadily rose. Basically, scale was actively increasing the value of the platform for the artists.
But actually, look closely, because that growth doesn't last forever. Notice what happens next. At a certain threshold of massive scale, traffic just stops heavily influencing the item price. The price plateaus entirely. This brilliantly illustrates the saturation effect. It shows us that while scale allows artists to charge a premium up to a certain point, there is a hard ceiling. Even in a specialty, artisanal marketplace, the inescapable gravity of market saturation eventually takes hold. Navigating all these complex economics required a seriously strong compass. As a certified B Corporation, Etsy's stated goal was to literally factor social change and environmental impact into their metrics of success, not just raw profit. They actively chose not to dump money into traditional marketing like an Amazon or an eBay, relying instead on local community events, craft workshops, and organic word of mouth. They constantly had to decide exactly what kind of platform they wanted to be, balancing the cold, hard math of e-commerce with this deeply human-centric mission statement.
Which leaves us with this final, pretty profound thought. We've seen how Etsy grew from a tiny utopian idea into an economic powerhouse, fought off an existential crisis of cheap fakes, and brilliantly used its own community to regulate itself. But as platforms grow from just thousands of early adopters to tens of millions of global consumers, is the fight between pure authenticity and mass scale a battle that can actually be won permanently, or is it just a constant, never-ending negotiation between the soul of a community and the demands of the market? It's definitely something to think about the next time you click buy on a beautifully crafted, one-of-a-kind item. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer.